Hey, David Brewster here with the 3 for All, and this is 3 Kirk Hammett Licks from 1989. And of course, we're going to be talking about Metallica. And I did feature Metallica in Chordplay around this time last year, for Metal Month in October. And I haven't really featured Kirk as far as a 3 for All, but this is the first time we've actually looked at some of his licks. And Kirk is a legend of metal guitar. He kind of helped form the band Exodus when he was about 16, which is unbelievable. And then when he was about 20 or 21, he started studying with Joe Satriani. And then he also got an offer to join the band Metallica, after they kicked Dave Mustaine out. So Kirk definitely, is just a legend. When you trace back, the early days of Exodus, the early days of Metallica, and then they just exploded, and just dominated metal, throughout the 80s and 90s and beyond. I'll fully admit when I had the idea for this lesson, I knew that in the comment section or maybe on Facebook or wherever, people were going to throw out some mud and sling some dirt. Kirk Hammett, what is it, just a wah pedal, demo video or something like that. And for some reason in recent years, like the last maybe 10 years or somewhere around the collapse of Napster and, when Lars and James kind of had this big backlash, about online piracy, which, unpopular opinion, but Lars was right. He was protecting his music and his art. But people just gave him a hard time because they looked at him as some sort of rich rock star, and it's like, no, he was trying to protect his work, and he was right. Back then, like in the early 2000s, people just, dragged him over hot coals or whatever. And that's when I noticed this kind of change because, when I was in high school, and I'll say this with complete sincerity and truth, when I was in high school, you didn't mess with Metallica. You didn't say something negative about the band because if you did, you'd probably get your ass kicked. I have noticed over the years online, there has been one consistent, person that's always stood up for Metallica and has created a lot of content and, sung praises for the band. That's Ben Eller, Uncle Ben. And he's kind of an exception to the trend online. It just seems like it became a thing to make fun of Kirk Hammett and the use of wah pedals. And yeah, Kirk likes wah pedals. Big deal. So did Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan and a whole bunch of other people too. Michael Schenker. There's a ton. So for some reason he became a target, just like Lars and James back in the day with the Napster thing. And I don't know. And when I first started to notice it online, I thought, man, this isn't cool. He's a legend. He changed the face of metal guitar, totally. But I started seeing memes and some of these things popping up, and some of them are pretty funny. I think Kirk himself even has a good sense of humor. So some of these things that have floated around online, if he saw them, he probably laughed like, "Wow, that's making fun of me," but that is pretty funny. And like this meme right here. When I first saw this, I was kind of like, "Man," and then I started laughing because it is hilarious. For the Kirk Hammett fans watching this that maybe didn't realize, there was a book that came out earlier this year, The Sound and the Fury, which that was put together with Kirk Hammett and Nick Balcott, from Grim Reaper fame. And it was a, kind of a collection of all of his old Guitar World magazine, lessons and articles from the 90s. And that was a great column, and back in the day, like in the 90s, well, you had John Petrucci, you had Kirk Hammett, you had, a lot of great players, Zakk Wylde, Dimebag. There's a ton of great players that popped up, in those lessons in Guitar World. So if you're a Kirk Hammett fan, totally check out Sound of the Fury. It's licks and warm-ups and all this kind of stuff. But then he's also talking too about, living on the road and gigging and equipment and all this different stuff. Great book. I haven't checked it out yet, but I know that's going to be a great one. One more thing, and I know I'm talking, but I haven't featured Kirk yet, and I had some things I wanted to say. But, for me, and I've talked to lots of people over the years since I was in high school about Metallica, and it seems like almost everybody I talk to says something different, or they have a different favorite song, or a different favorite album or era. A lot of people, of course, it's the old, the old stuff, the glory days. Some people, it's that middle area around the Black Album. And then some fans are more, kind of pumped up about their more recent releases. But for me, it's all the old school stuff. Master of Puppets is my favorite Metallica album, period. That album, when I think of Metallica, that's what I think of, is that album. Disposable Heroes, The Thing That Should Not Be, Damage Incorporated, all those songs. Of course, Master of Puppets and Battery and everything else too. Sanitarium. But that's Metallica. You know, when I think of the band, or, you know, someone's talking to me about Metallica, that album cover and some of that music just pops in my head. No offense to Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, you know, Justice for All, the Black Album, and everything else. But that's the one for me. And there's a certain image, you know, that I saw a long time ago. And when I think of the band and I think of that era and just the impact that it had, you know, visually and sonically and everything, there's a certain image from the Master of Puppets tour. It's just pure metal when I see it. You know, James is just totally into it. Like the knee of his jeans is ripped out. Kirk's right beside him just jamming. And for some reason, when I see that photo, it inspires me. You know, where it's like, yeah, I mean, it's just pure metal. The licks in this lesson came from 1989. I was like a bootleg in Philadelphia, and I did actually see Metallica on the Justice for All tour, which I guess it was technically right before the album, you know, was released. It was the Monsters of Rock, you know, tour with Van Halen, Scorpions, What Doc and Kingdom Come, and of course Metallica. My sister and I went, you know, and I was young, and that was the first concert I ever saw with actual headbangers in the crowd. My sister and I were like, "Oh my gosh, look, they're headbanging!" You know, we thought it was so cool. And I remember the concert. I mean, Metallica was just slaying, you know, hot on the heels of Master of Puppets and getting ready to release, you know, Injustice for All. So this was the extension of that tour, you know, post Monsters of Rock. And it was in Philly. There's some good footage. I don't think they ever actually released this, but a good solo from Kirk, too. All right, the first lick is this busy legato idea. It reminds me of Randy Rhoads, big time. And it's something like this. One more time. So let me slow that down so you can kind of see what's going on here. So it's loosely based around Phrygian. It's kind of what I'm hearing. You could also think of this related to Mixolydian, and definitely Metallica uses Mixolydian, but I'm thinking more of the Phrygian kind of tonality, because it's a little bit darker. And, you know, so that would be A Phrygian, if you want to think of that in the key of A. You know, A Phrygian. So it starts and it's going to feel a little bit like pentatonic, but then it changes. And you can also see we're using all of your fret hand fingers, which is great. It's a great, you know, workout and kind of warm up kind of lick. All right, so let me play through that kind of slow so you can see what's going on. And that's the motif for the sequence. And then he really just starts moving that up in whole steps. But let's lock into that first one so you can really see the pattern. And then you can start moving it around. One more time. Now take that exact same thing and move it up a whole step. So now we're moving from, you know, A Phrygian to B Phrygian. And then move it up another whole step, and now you're in C sharp Phrygian. So when you get used to that lick, you know, then you can start kind of moving it around the fretboard like this. All right, one more time at tempo. The next idea is the slip and slide, you know, kind of shifting idea. And I actually learned this from, you know, studying some licks and ideas from George Lynch. So I don't know if Kirk picked this up from George or if it was just something that he, you know, kind of built on his own. But he's, you know, kind of moving down the D and the G strings. And you could relate this to a couple different keys and tonalities. You could even kind of move it, you know, in modal, you know, directions. It just depends on what you're calling the root or what key, you know, you're declaring this lick is in. So it looks like this. One more time. Now right there, I'm thinking of that as E Dorian, technically, because I'm thinking of E as the root. You know, the first note he plays right there is that E. And he's kind of getting that squeal. You know, he's using a pinch harmonic on the G string all the way down, you know, that lick. And you could also relate this to D major, which is going to sound way too happy for Metallica. And you could also relate it to B minor, too. It just depends on, you know, where you want to put it. But the important thing here is the slip and slide maneuver itself, because we're grabbing E and then we're doing a pinch on that G, slide the G down to F sharp, and then grab the D. So we're kind of sidestepping through these little, you know, thirds. There's basically minor thirds and major thirds all the way down. And I'm just kind of ending on that E note down there. But then slowly, and he's really choking, you know, that pinch harmonic. He's really digging in. So don't be afraid to squeal, you know, on the way down like that. But here's the footage from '89 with Kirk playing that lick. Now for the moment some of you have been waiting for, the elusive wah pedal. And I did want to take a second and mention, I recently picked up this exotic XW1, you know, wah pedal. This is hands down the best wah pedal I've ever owned. I've had a bunch of crybabies. I had the Jerry Cantrell, I had the original, I had a 535 for a while, and you know, I've just kind of gone through a lot of wah pedals. They've broken down, you know, I ended up like trading them or selling them or whatever over the years. And it's one of those pedals that kind of appears and then disappears as far as, you know, my equipment, my rig, or my studio. But, you know, I've kind of lusted after one of these for a while, and I've, you know, started seeing reviews and online demos and stuff. But I want to take a second and thank everybody for supporting the channel, either on Patreon, you know, from watching on YouTube, also the support on Facebook too, because in a roundabout way, the viewers in this channel helped me buy this, because this is kind of a pricey pedal. You know, Exotic makes great stuff. Technically, this wah pedal is worth more than my junky amplifier over here, you know, the Vampire. So, great wah. If you're looking for something different, something new, it's basically like a 535, but even better. And I can say that with authority because I used to have a 535, and this thing smokes a 535. And as far as Kirk's wah usage is concerned, yes, on certain solos, on certain times, he is working the wah, you know, like Hendrix, and he's sweeping his foot back and forth and really giving it, you know, giving it his all. But sometimes when you see Kirk Hammett at his pedal board and his foot is near or on his wah pedal, sometimes he's actually kind of doing the Michael Schenker thing, and he's using it as a tone filter. And I've mentioned this in numerous videos, but I've never really demonstrated what that means. So really, I'm going to demonstrate that in this video, and also the lick we're getting ready to look at. But when you use a wah pedal, you know, I was talking about, like, you know, Hendrix and Voodoo Child, you know, that's where you're sweeping with your foot and you're constantly moving the pedal. And when you use a wah pedal as a filter or a tone filter, you're basically setting the wah at a certain frequency or a certain angle, and you just leave it there, you know, for maybe the entire guitar solo, and you don't sweep it. You just kick it on and leave it, kind of set it and forget it. And sometimes you can hear that, you know, toe down. Sometimes you can find like those in-between areas somewhere, and then some people kind of get that really weird kind of honk, you know, by having it, you know, all the way back, like heel back or toe down. And you can find all these different frequencies and tones just by slowly moving, you know, your foot. And you're going to kind of listen and play and listen, and you can find, you know, dozens of different settings or whatever. And it really does make your leads or whatever you're playing jump out, you know, of a mix, especially if you're using, a similar, tone or, distortion or overdrive on your guitar. When you get to a lead or a fill or something like that, kick the wah on, set it somewhere, and it's really going to jump, in the mix, because you're going to hear this different frequency and this different sound. Let me demonstrate using the wah as a tone filter. So here's my tone without the wah, turned on, something like this. And then here it is with the wah kicked on, and basically I have toe down, so it's all the way down. It's going to sound very thin and nasally, like this. And what I'm going to do is just slowly, just ever so slightly, just pull it back just a little bit, just so it's not all the way down, like that. And it's going to sound ever so slightly different. Continue to manipulate. I'm just going to move it back even more. So now we're slowly starting to move toward heel down instead of toe down, like this. And so now let's do heel down. It's going to have this strange kind of honk like this. And kind of weird, but I like that sound. And then another thing you can experiment with, aside from just setting it, somewhere and forgetting it, and you can hear guitarists do this sometimes too with a wah, which is really cool. But you can basically have heel down, like all the way back, start playing some kind of repetitive, fast lick, and then just slowly sweep your foot, through the different stages of the wah. And you'll hear the lick you're playing kind of be colorized, or it's going to change. Catch Zakk Wylde. There's a ton of guitarists that do that kind of thing where they just kind of slowly sweep it instead of just moving it back and forth, like Voodoo Child. But there's a ton of stuff you can do with a wah aside from just doing, or all the, that kind of stuff. There's a ton of cool things you can do with wah. And here's the lick in question, where Kirk's using his wah as a tone filter. So at the beginning there's a bend, and I believe Kirk has the wah, heel down, like all the way back. And then he starts doing this repetitive, pull-off lick. And I believe he pushes the wah forward and just leaves it set somewhere as a tone filter. And it's something like this. One more time. And there you can see, you can't see my foot, and we can't see Kirk's foot in the footage either. But I have the wah all the way, heel down for that bend in the beginning. And then when that's up, I start to push, the wah down. I don't go all the way down, like toe down. It's just a little bit, backed away from all the way down, where it's still, full of treble and kind of a contrast to that wolfy, kind of honk in the beginning. And as far as that pull off, you're just pulling off from A to E and then grabbing that D, almost like a pivot. It's a Michael Schenker lick, big time. And you basically want to do that 7 times, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then grab that A and bend it up twice, and the second time with vibrato, bend it up a whole step. So one more time with this. Here's a bonus lick from this live footage, and this is totally a Michael Schenker lick, but Kirk's definitely influenced by Michael Schenker, so that's where it came from. But and then also people have kind of dogged Kurt about his vibrato, but listen to this lick, and like when he hits this first bend, he's got this really expressive, vibrato action, and then he starts doing the lick like this. One more time. And you can see there we're bending this D up to E, and that's where he's really milking that bend and vibrato. And then he's basically think of E minor pentatonic right here. We're going to grab this E, reach all the way up and grab that A, and then you're kind of pivoting with that D note there on the 15th fret on the B, like this. And I would just sit there and just play that lick over and over and over until it's really comfortable. But he basically does a cycle of that 3 times, like this. 1, 2, 3. And then you want to change it back to a G. Don't stretch up to that A, just grab G. And that's definitely going to feel like the minor pentatonic right there. Kind of count those groupings, or the repeats, and just make sure you do 3 of each set. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Alright, that's going to wrap this look at 3 Kirk Hammett licks from 1989. I'm definitely a Metallica fan, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of more or less, an old school Metallica fan, but I do like, some of their more recent music. And once again, unpopular opinion, Load and Reload were actually great albums, and I know they got a lot of flack, and they cut their hair and everything, and that was kind of a, 90s kind of, question mark for a lot of Metallica fans. But going back and listening to Load and Reload, those albums are awesome. They're very... it's different. It's not Master of Puppets or Ride the Lightning or something like that. But there's great music. Some great songs on both those albums. And then, there's kind of some, interesting things. Saint Anger and Lulu and some of those releases where it's like, what? But definitely nothing will change my memory and my appreciation and respect for the early days, the glory days, back in the 80s. And there's just something about that era, and that sound, and the music, and the tones, and the, beyond heavy guitar tones and distortion, and just everything, very, very magical. And definitely Cliff Burton, of course, the late great bassist, phenomenal bass player, hugely, massively influential. But a lot of people, especially if they're younger, they don't realize, the impact and influence that this band had on metal. I mean, you can hear it and see it everywhere. It's been long enough that some people don't really recognize it, and they don't really pay respect to Metallica, but they should, because without Metallica, metal would sound really weird, today. It wouldn't have, it might have that dark, ominous, fuzzy flavor from Black Sabbath, but definitely Metallica was like the spearhead that was sharpened or whatever. And it just drove everything in a brand new direction, speed metal, basically. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content material. Thank you.